Hi everyone, I'm Random, and today I'll be reading The First Night, which is part 2 of the series Castaways by CirrusGrey on AO3. This is a Magnus Archives fanfiction with a rating of general audiences, and no archive warnings apply. The category is male x male, and the characters are Martin Blackwood and Jonathan Sims. The romantic relationships are Martin Blackwood with Jonathan Sims. The additional tags are post-canon, post-episode E200, last words, location somewhere else, light angst, kissing, and fluff. Now on to the story. That first night, after they had made their way to the hotel and bid their goodnights to Rufus, John let go of Martin's hand as the second door of their room closed behind them and took a step back. "John?" Martin said, alarmed, already aching to have the small point of contact back. "Martin," John responded. He was looking to the side, head slightly lowered, not meeting Martin's eyes. "We should talk about what happened. About all of it. What we did." He took a shaky breath. "And the promises we made and didn't keep." The words seemed to pain him as they came out. Martin inhaled, long and slow. John was right. It was a conversation they had to have at some point, and his stinging betrayal of John's decision to go against the group's plan was still eating at Martin's heart, but... "Rufus said the Foundation has therapists we can see, right? So can we just put that conversation on hold for now, until we can have it in front of a couples counselor?" John shrunk in on himself even further upon hearing that, and spoke in a small voice. "Okay." That was not the reaction Martin had wanted at all. Third-party mediation would be good. It could help them have a constructive conversation about all of this instead of just arguing circles around each other. John, however, seemed to have interpreted the suggestion as an indication that Martin was still too angry to even talk to him without using someone else there as a buffer. God, after all they'd been through, and they were still hurting each other without meaning to. "Thank you," Martin said, trying to inject all the softness and love he had ever felt into the words. "Now can you please just come over here and kiss me?" John's head shot up, wide eyes meeting Martin's with a hopeful light building in them. Martin held out his arms to him. "I almost lost you today, John. I don't want to spend another minute apart." It was all he needed to say. John took the few steps necessary to meet him in a hug, and they sank into the comfort of each other's arms with the twin relieved sighs. "I was so scared. John admitted in a small voice. "When you said you wouldn't leave, when he thought I was gonna lose you." "Shh," Martin replied. "I know, me too, but we'll talk later. I love you. More than anything." "I love you too." He turned his head and nudged it against John's until they were at the proper angle to press their lips together. "Now just kiss me, you fool." The laugh John gave at the reference was broken and breathy with tears, but the kiss he pressed to Martin's lips were strong and sure. Martin relaxed into it, feeling the tension bleeding out of his shoulders with every small movement of John's mouth against his own. He flattened his hands against the small of John's back, and John responded with small, needy noises and fingers twisting into Martin's hair. "Hey there," Martin said, tipping his chin away from the kiss as he felt John's lips part against his own. He didn't get to finish the question as John ducked his head to chase Martin and sealed their lips together once more. Martin gave him a fold at the interruption, but took it in stride, opening his mouth to the soft press of John's and letting himself sink into the comfort and surety of life in the breaths they shared between them. "Do you want to shower now or in the morning?" he asked the next time John gave him a moment to think, the words coming out a bit jumbled with the speed he tried to say them. John blinked at him for a second, lips moving as he processed what Martin had said, then shook his head. "Morning. I don't want..." He cut himself off, but from the way his arms tightened around Martin, he could guess that the sentence would have ended with something along the lines of, "to let you go." It didn't matter, because John backtracked and finished with, "We don't have a change of clothes anyway." Right, Martin said, grimacing for a moment in regret at the memories of the backpacks they had hauled all the way from the Highlands to London and then proceeded to lose. His down the interdimensional cavern at Hilltop Road, and John's in the tunnel where he left to confront Jonah. You think Rufus will be able to find us something? Well, I'd imagine the Foundation has something available for this sort of situation, yes. John said, but his mind did not seem focused on the conversation as his eyes drifted heavy-lidded and he leaned back towards Martin's mouth. Bed then? Martin asked, because from John's expression he was about to either fall asleep or snog Martin within an inch of his life. Possibly both. John nodded, and luckily the hotel room was small enough that the bed was only a few steps away, since neither of them seemed inclined to let the other go for the short amount of time it would require them to actually walk over to it. They stumbled to it instead, like the unfortunate souls who crashed out of a three-legged race within the first 5 minutes, and collapsed ungracefully on top of each other when they got there. John did neither, as it turned out. What he did do was kick off his own shoes, then use his toes to pry Martin's off as well. This done, he maneuvered them both under the sheets and laid down, face to face, close enough that Martin could feel his breath ghosting over his cheek. Martin closed his eyes against the sight of him, briefly overwhelmed with the familiarity of the scene. How many nights had he fallen asleep like this? John's hand tangled in his own, secure in the knowledge that he would still be there when he woke. And once, just once, he had woken up alone and found John gone. A warm palm landed on his cheek, and he opened his eyes to see John watching him back. The hand on his face was a gentle, grounding touch, and a smile twitched at Martin's lips when he felt John's thumb brush slowly over his eyebrow, smoothing it back and taking the worried furrow between his brows with it. John's gaze was startlingly dark and intense as his eyes traced the movement of his thumb. And his expression, it reminded Martin of the way John looked at him on their first night together, fresh out of the lonely and still trembling for it. John had drawn him close and whispered in a hoarse and shaking voice that he was almost scared of how much he loved Martin, of how far he would go to keep him safe. Martin never would have been able to guess just how far he meant when he said that. He was pretty certain John hadn't known then either. Martin, John said now, and Martin turned his head to press a kiss at the base of John's palm. John, he replied, and left it at that. Sleep came so gradually as to be imperceptible, and when it finally overtook him, Martin's last sight was John's eyes, still awake and watching Martin like he was the only thing in the world that ever mattered. The first thing Martin noticed when he awoke was John's eyes, and, more specifically, the fact that they were closed. Fear spiked through him, and one hand shot out, giving a hard shove against John's shoulder as Martin gasped his name. John! John's eyes snapped open as he jerked awake. What? He blurted, startled, and then, Martin, what? Oh, God. Martin melted forward into him, wrapping him in an enveloping hug that John returned with a series of confused noises. Martin, what is it? Is everything all right? He asked, voice still blurry with sleep. Martin nodded into his shoulder, squeezing him even tighter, then pried his face free and attempted the more complicated process of coherent speech. Your eyes, he managed after a moment. You were sleeping with your eyes closed. I didn't know what he thought. He forced a laugh at his own fear. He knew exactly what he thought. He thought it enough times before, at Salaces and in the tunnels with Melanie and Georgie, watching John sleep with his eyes open. He looks like a corpse like this, and he'll probably look like he is only sleeping when he really does die. I was? John raised a hand to his own face, touching the corner of his eyes with careful fingertips. He looked surprised, but pleased. I suppose I was. I guess the creepy has stopped entirely now. The last was said with a teasing smirk cast in Martin's direction, and Martin staved off what might have been the beginnings of a sob by forcing another laugh. This one felt much more real. I guess it has, he said. Did you dream? No, John said, and the smile that spread across his face was now more content than any Martin had ever seen from him in far too long. No, I didn't. Good, Martin said, and leaned forward to kiss him. Jon hummed against his mouth, sinking into it and deepening the kiss the way he'd probably been intending to the night before. And Martin let Jon press him back into the pillows and, as he hoped, snug him within an inch of his life. He didn't know what it was, the full night of sleep, the slanting morning sun, the high of surviving against all the odds, or simply the giddiness from kissing him so thoroughly, but Jon's eyes were sparkling when he pulled back. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," Martin replied, a bit breathless. "I could get used to this." Amusement danced over Jon's face, and he crossed his arms on Martin's chest, resting his chin on top and peering up at him from his perch. "You'll have time to, I suppose." "Yes," Martin said, though he didn't quite believe it. Time was the only thing they'd never had, and it was harder to think that there were no looming threats trying to cut it short on them now. And they'd have time to come to terms with that too, now it seemed. Jon bit his lip and his eyes flickered away from Martin's for a moment before returning. "There's a lot I want to talk about," he began. "Can we—" Martin started, and Jon cut him off with a hasty kiss. Martin blinked up at him in surprise when he pulled away. "Sorry," Jon said, shrugging his still crossed arms. "I can't really hold up a hand to shush you at the moment." "Right," Martin said skeptically. "That's the only reason." Jon just grinned. "Well, what I was going to say was, I like your idea of bringing in a third person. I agree it could be helpful for us to have someone who could guide," he hesitated over the wording, "a constructive conversation about what happened, particularly if it's someone who's dealt with situations like ours before." A bloom of warmth exploded in Martin's chest. "Really?" "Really," Jon said. "I love you, Martin, and I know you love me, but clearly that doesn't make us the best at talking to each other about these things." He gave a rueful laugh. "And I want to get better at talking to you." "I want that too," Martin said. "Good." Jon smiled at him and leaned in to steal one more kiss before sitting up and stretching. Martin followed suit, though he stopped halfway through with a groan and slumped back onto Jon's shoulders. "I am so sore right now," he complained. The effects of walking from Scotland to London were making themselves known now that they were in a world without the fears. "Mm-hmm," Jon hummed in agreement. "I feel human." "Good for you," Martin said. Though he wanted it to be snarky, it came out far too sincere for that. For Jon, feeling human was a blessing, aches and pains and all. As if to prove it, he stretched again, arms reaching high over his head, then gave a satisfied sigh and slid out of the bed. "Come on," he said, holding out a hand to Martin and pulling him, much more reluctantly, out of the bed to follow him. Despite the dirt and dried blood that still clung to their skin and clothes, and the overall bedraggled appearance of having not showered in far too long, there was a bright and lively energy to his movements. Hopeful, Martin's brain supplied, and it made him smile when he realized how true it was. Jon looked hopeful in a way he hadn't ever since the world ended. It was a good look on him. "I'm coming," Martin replied, but took an extra moment to give an exaggerated yawn before following through. "Good," Jon said, and once Martin was standing, he leaned forward to give him a long, lingering kiss. "Let's go find a couples counselor." "They're very sweet. I love them so much. I don't have much to say. I have a streaming account on Twitch as Nebulous Clouds. I play Minecraft there with my friend. Watch us. You can watch us play where I failed to build an EXP farm and a chunk loader miserably. And we fell off the bridge. We fell off a bridge like multiple times within a minute. It was just 2 minutes of me and her falling off of a bridge and failing to water clutch it. to the water bucket clutch that I forgot the name of. I know the actual name. I promise. I just forgot at the moment. Yeah, that's all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed. It was a very fun fic for me to read. If you're on AO3, remember to leave kudos and a comment. It really helps. It makes my heart very happy. And if you're on YouTube, then leave a like and a comment and subscribe so that you can get more updates and you don't miss when I post a new installation, so that you can listen to it instead of reading it, because I'd say that reading is boring, but I don't listen to podfics. I prefer reading. Is it hypocritical of me to be doing this, to be reading podfics when I don't listen to podfics, when I prefer to actually read stuff? I don't know. I don't care. Oh well, too bad, so sad. Leave kudos, a comment, and a like, and subscribe, and yeah. See you next time. Bye.